When my son pointed at the door and told me to get out of his house, I didn't cry. I smiled because that house had never once been his, and he still didn't know it. It was a Sunday. It's always a Sunday when a family decides to break its own heart. The Lord's Day when everybody's full of collard greens and cornbread and feeling brave enough to do the ugly thing they've been chewing on all week. Terry waited until the dishes were soaking in the sink. He always did have a coward's sense of timing, nothing like his daddy. God rest him who never once made a body wait for bad news. "Mama," he said, "we need to talk." Behind him, my daughter-in-law Renee leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, the way a woman stands when she's already seen the ending of a show and just wants to watch your face during it. Her nails were done. Burgundy. I noticed things like that. 30 years cooking for other people's weddings and funerals teaches you to read a room before anybody opens their mouth. "It's about your live-in situation," Terry went on and would not look at me. "The kids need more space, and you're not getting any younger. There's a real nice senior community out past the highway assisted living. They've got activities, nurses, the whole thing. We just think it's time." I dried my hands on the dish towel Cornelius's mother embroidered before I was even a bride. I folded it. I set it down. "You mean a nursing home," I said. It's a nursing home, Terrence." I have never raised my voice in that kitchen, and I didn't start then. "Say the word. You can afford the truth even if you can't afford much else lately." That landed somewhere. His jaw went tight. Renee's eyes flicked up from her phone. And then my boy, 41 years old, a grown man I taught to tie his shoes on the back porch of a house his grandfather bought in 1948. When a black man could barely get a bank to look at him, my boy lost the last of his nerve and reached for the only thing he had left. Volume. "Then leave," Terry said. "If you won't go to the home, then pack your things and get out of my house." My house. The words bounced off the walls I'd painted down the hall where my pictures hang up the stairs I have mopped every week for 3 years. Renee didn't bother hiding her smile that time. And here is the thing I have learned in 64 years on God's earth. There is a moment right after the worst is said out loud when everybody waits for the woman to fall apart. They lean in for it. They have planned the rest of their afternoon around it. I did not give it to them. I went upstairs to the little room at the back, the one barely bigger than a pantry, the one Renee already had measured in her mind for a walk-in closet. I took down my old leather suitcase. I folded my blouses slow and neat the way I fold everything. I wrapped the wooden box with Cornelius's photographs inside a scarf and laid it on top. I did not shed one tear. 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Terry sighed like the help had shown up and pulled the door open. A car sat at the curb, clean dark idling. A woman climbed out in a charcoal suit, a leather portfolio under her arm, and walked up my front steps like she owned the deed to the world. She did not as it happened. I owned the deed. She just carried it. "Mama," Terry said slowly, the color leaving his face. "Who is that?" I picked up my suitcase. I gave my son one last look. "That," I said, "is my attorney. She's got some papers you're going to want to read very carefully." I stepped past him out into the light. "Thank you, baby. You just made my decision a whole lot easier. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and the getting ahead is the part that makes you angry. Let me back up so you understand what it took to build the thing they tried to steal. Because a person who never built anything cannot understand what it costs to watch your own blood try to carry it off in the night. I built it with pie. That's the truth, plain as Sunday. 40 years ago, I had 2 pots, 1 oven that ran 40 degrees hot, and a recipe for sweet potato pie that my mother got from her mother, who carried it out of Alabama in her head because you couldn't carry much else. I sold those pies at the church fair off a card table with a bed sheet over it. $2 a slice, 4 for a whole. First Saturday, I cleared $31 and thought I had robbed a bank. Cornelius Neal, everybody called him. He watched me count that money on the kitchen table, smoothing every bill out flat, and he didn't laugh at me the way some men would have. He said, "Retta, you're not selling pie. You're selling Sunday. You're selling somebody's grandmother who passed. People will pay anything to taste a memory." That man, he saw the shape of a thing before the thing knew its own name. So we made it a business. Callaway's Soul Kitchen. Catering weddings, repasts, church anniversaries. The Union Hall Christmas party every December for 22 years running. We fed this whole side of the city. When the Hendersons buried their boy, I made the food and would not take a dime. When the mayor's niece got married downtown, I charged her enough to cover 4 funerals, and she thanked me for the privilege. That is the business. You feed the grief for free and let the joy pay the bills. And if you do it long enough and your greens are right, you end up with something. We ended up with 2 somethings. The first was the house. And the house was never really about the house. It was about the ground underneath it. Neil's father, Otis Callaway, bought that lot in 1948 cash from a white man who only sold it to him because he assumed a colored family would lose it inside of 5 years, and he'd buy it back cheap. Otis paid for it driving a delivery truck 6 days a week and never missed a payment just to spite a prophecy. He used to stand in the yard and tell Neil they can take a lot of things from a man, but they cannot take dirt he already owns. I heard that man say it 100 times. I believed it. I still do, which is a good part of why we're here. The second something was the building on Jefferson Street. We bought it in '99, a sagging brick 2-story that used to be a print shop, and we put the central kitchen on the ground floor, the big ranges, the walk-in coolers, the steel tables where 6 women in hairnets turned out 300 plates before noon. Upstairs we ran the office. For 20 years it was just the shop. Then the city decided that neighborhood was suddenly worth something the way cities do, and a man in a nice car knocked on my door and offered me more for that building than Neil and I made in our first 15 years combined. Last appraisal put it at $1.2 million. $1.2 million for a print shop we bought with a loan we begged for. Now, you'd think a woman sitting on $1 million building in a paid-off lot her family held for 70 years would feel safe. And I did. That was my mistake. Not foolishness, mind you. I want you to understand the difference, because everybody who hears this story wants to call me a fool, and I was not a fool. I was something more dangerous to myself. I was tired and I was grieving, and I loved my son. Neil died 11 years ago. Hard on a Tuesday between the lunch service and the dinner one. He was bringing me a cup of coffee, and he just set it down and sat down and didn't get back up. The cup didn't even spill. I think about that cup more than I should. After we buried him, my hands started going on me. Arthritis, the knuckles swelled up like walnuts, and some mornings I couldn't make a fist, let alone roll out 40 pie crusts. The business needed somebody to run it, and there was Terry. 40 then gone soft in an office job he hated, but he was Neil's boy, and when he asked to come run his daddy's company, I heard his daddy in the asking. So I signed him on, made him general manager, put his name on the door. And because my own mother had a stroke at 70 and spent her last 2 years unable to sign so much as a birthday card, I did the prudent thing, the thing everybody tells you to do. I signed Terry a power of attorney, so that if my hands quit, or my mind did, my son could pay the vendors and sign the checks and keep the lights on without the courts getting involved. Manage. That word is going to matter later, so hold on to it. The paper gave him the right to manage. It did not give him the right to do what he did. But we'll get there. Here is the one thing I did right, and I'll tell you now, even though I never told another living soul in all the years since. The week after we buried Neil, before my hands ever went bad, before Terry ever asked for a thing, I drove down to a lawyer's office by myself, and I did something with that Jefferson building. Just one quiet errand on a grieving widow's afternoon. I'll let it sit for now. Otis Callaway taught me you don't show a man your whole hand just because he's family. Especially because he's family. Now let me tell you about money and the 3 people who sat at my table, because they each loved it a different way, and the differences are the whole story. I loved money the way you love a good knife for what it lets you do. It paid for 2 kids' college, mine and a neighbor's. It put a new roof on the church. It was going to send Jordan and Maya anywhere they were smart enough to get into. Money to me was just stored up work, and work is just stored up love. That's all it ever was. Terry loved money the way a man loves air without ever once thinking about where it comes from. He never went without. Never watched his mother flatten dollar bills on a table. He grew up inside the result of all that pie, and a child raised inside, the result never learns the cost. To Terry, the house and the building and the business weren't things somebody bled for. They were just the future sitting there with his name already on them in his mind. And Renee Lord let me be fair to Renee because the easy thing is to make her a witch, and the easy thing is usually a lie. Renee loved money the way a drowning person loves a rope. She grew up watching her own mother lose their house, a foreclosure, a sheriff on the porch, their things on the curb in the rain while the neighbors looked. She was 9. She told me that once early before she decided to hate me, and I should have understood her better for it. A woman who watched the law take her childhood home will do almost anything to never be that helpless again. Almost anything. The almost is where she and I parted ways, and it's why she's not in this house anymore, and I am. But that came later. For 3 years on the outside, we were a family. And the best of it, the part that still puts a stone in my throat, was Friday afternoons. Every Friday when school let out, Terry would drop the children with me and we baked. Always chocolate cake. Maya, 6 years old, 2 front teeth gone, would stand on the kitchen stool and crack the eggs mostly into the bowl. Jordan, 9, and trying so hard to be a man, already measured the flour with a scientist's frown like the whole world depended on a level cup. Maya named it. She called it Grandma's Magic Hour, and she'd announce it to anybody who'd listen, "It's Grandma's Magic Hour," like the kitchen was a church and the oven was the altar. It was the only hour of the week I felt like myself anymore. Not the old woman with the bad hands in the back room. Just Retta in her kitchen, where she has always known exactly who she is. One of those Fridays, my mother came back to me. Not in the flesh, in the flour. I was showing Maya how you fold the batter, and don't beat it, fold baby gentle. And I heard my own mother's voice come out of my mouth. The thing she said to me on her knees in the garden behind the house. I grew up in dirt under both our nails. Land remembers who bled for it, child. Don't you ever let go of dirt you already own. I taught it to Maya that afternoon like a recipe. She was 6. She didn't understand it. I'm 64, and I'm ashamed to say that when I taught it to her, neither did I. Not all the way. Not yet. Because that very same season, those very same Fridays I was making magic with my grandbabies, a letter was already sitting in a post office box across town in my old name waiting to tell me exactly how much of all this I had already lost. I have kept a post office box downtown since 1987. Box 414. It started as the business address, back when I didn't want strangers knowing where I lived, and I never let it go. Paid the renewal every year out of habit, the way you keep paying for a thing your husband set up, because letting it lapse feels like letting him lapse. I checked it maybe once a month. Junk mostly. Catalogs. The occasional card from a bride I fed 30 years ago. It was a Tuesday in February when I drove down and turned the little brass key and found the envelope that ended my old life. It was from the bank. Not a flyer, a statement the kind with the perforated edge and the cellophane window. Annual disclosure, home equity line of credit. Property address, mine. Borrower of record, me. And in the box where the numbers live, plain as a tombstone, outstanding principal balance, $200,000. I want you to understand, I have never in my life borrowed against that house. Otis Calloway did not pay cash in 1948 so that I could put his grandson's dirt up as collateral. I had never signed a single page for a home equity anything. I stood in that little marble room with the brass boxes and the fluorescent hum, and I read it 3 times, and the floor did not fall out from under me the way people say. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock you didn't know was on you. $200,000. Borrowed in my name. On my house. With a signature I never made. Now here is where the story would tell you. I sat down on the post office floor and wept or drove home and screamed at my son. I did neither. 30 years in business teaches you one thing above all others. When the number is bad, you do not react to the number. You go get all the numbers. A woman who screams shows her hand. A woman who counts keeps it. So I did not go home. I went and found a lawyer. Not the family lawyer that man golfed with Terry. I asked the one person I trusted with a secret, my old friend and Neil's old friend Walter Green, a deacon who'd spent 30 years working for the post office and somehow knew everybody in this city worth knowing. Walter gave me a name and didn't ask why. The name was Gloria Reeves Estate, and Elder Law, a black woman about 50 with a handshake like a vice, and an office full of books she'd actually read. I laid the bank statement on her desk. She read it once. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "before I run a single search, I need you to tell me the truth about one thing because everything else depends on it. Did you sign for this loan?" "No, ma'am." "You're certain? Not a paper your son slid across the table that you didn't read?" "I have read every paper anyone has ever put in front of me," I said. "It is the only reason I have anything left to steal." She looked at me a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and told her paralegal to clear her afternoon. It took Gloria 9 days to pull the picture together, and she laid it out for me, the way you'd lay out a body for a wake, gently completely sparing me nothing. I'm going to give you the numbers the way she gave them to me, because the numbers are the betrayal. Vague hurt is just feeling. Specific hurt is evidence. Won the home equity line $200,000 opened 14 months prior against the family home in my name, signed by a hand that was not mine. Drawn down nearly to zero. Where it went, we'd find out, but it was gone. 2. The $185,000. 3 years back, right when my hands got bad enough that I'd finally brought Terry in to help, Terry sat in my kitchen with that warm, easy smile and told me the business needed capital to open a second location. A real restaurant. Daddy's dream mama. And I had just sold my own mother's house, the one I grew up in after she passed, sold it for $185,000. Every dollar of my mother's life. And I handed it to my son for a restaurant that Gloria confirmed was never leased, never permitted, never anything. There was no second location. There was only a hole I'd poured my mother into. 3. The business itself. Dennis Boyd, the forensic accountant, Gloria brought in a quiet man who talked to spreadsheets like they were witnesses, traced 3 years of the company's books. $340,000 bled out slow. Payments to vendors that did not exist. A linen service with no address. A consulting firm that was a checking account and nothing else. 40,000 here, 60 there, never enough at once to scream all of it, adding up to a number that did. I sat across from Gloria, and I did the arithmetic that any caterer does in her head before the bride even finishes talking. 200, 185, 340, $725,000. Gone out of the things Neil and I and his father before us had built while I slept in a converted pantry and washed my daughter-in-law's good blouses by hand because the dryer was too rough on them. And then Gloria turned over the last page, and that was the one that changed everything. It was a draft, a purchase and sale agreement for the Jefferson Street building. The buyer's name across the top was Garrett Pope Development, LLC, the man in the nice car come back around. The price was $890,000, well under the appraisal, the kind of number a man takes when he needs cash fast and doesn't want questions. And on the seller's line, on the signature line, where the owner of $1 million building swears away her life's work, was my name. My signature, looped and slanted in a way I have never once written it. That is the moment if you want to know that my grief turned into something with a spine. Spending my money is theft, and theft is a sin, and I would have grieved it as a mother grieves a wayward child. But forging my hand to sell my husband's building out from under his own grandchildren, that is not a son who lost his way. That is a criminal who happens to call me Mama. Mrs. Calloway, Gloria said carefully, watching my face. I have to ask what you want, because I can make this very quiet, or I can make it very loud. But once we move, we can't unmove. I don't know yet, I told her, and that was the truth. Give me a little time to be sure. I drove home, to his house, which is my house. I made dinner because that is what I do. And after my grandson Jordan came and sat at the counter while I dried the dishes, 9 years old, swinging his legs, telling me about a fight at recess. And then he said the thing children say, the thing they don't know, is a knife. Grandma, when you move to the old folks' place, can I still come bake? I kept drying the plate. Who said Grandma was moving baby? Mom did. He shrugged easy the way you report the weather. She told Daddy your room's going to be her closet. She already showed me where the shoe part goes. He looked up at me, then suddenly worried he'd done something. But I drew you in our family picture for school. Mom said you're not really family, you just stay here for now. But I put you in anyway. You're the one who makes the cake. I set the plate down very gently so it would not break because something in me already had. Yes, baby, I said. Grandma's the one who makes the cake. That night I sat alone in the pantry room they'd already measured for shoes, and I did not cry for long, a few minutes in the dark, for the boy Terry used to be, who I buried that day more surely than I'd ever buried his father. Then I turned on the little lamp, and I took out a yellow legal pad, and I uncapped a pen. They thought they had pushed an old woman out a door. They had no idea they'd just hired the wrong opponent. The next morning I got up, made grits the way I always do, packed Jordan's lunch, kissed Maya's part where the comb leaves a road, and waved them all off to school and work with a smile I want you to picture because I held it for the better part of 2 months. A good smile. A grandmother's smile. The smile of a woman who has accepted her place. Underneath it I was building a case. You have to understand the spirit of what I did because it matters to me that you don't mistake it. This was never revenge. Revenge is a feeling, and feelings are sloppy. They make you scream in post offices and tip your hand. What I was doing was older and colder than revenge. I was correcting an error. Legally, patiently. The way you'd fix a wrong number in a ledger, not by burning the book, but by finding every place the mistake had spread and setting each one right. Here is how you do that. I'm going to tell you the steps because the steps are the whole satisfaction of it and because some grandmother out there is going to need them one day. Step 1. You find out what the paper actually says. Everyone assumes the power of attorney was the trap. It wasn't. The power of attorney was the key to my cell, and it had been in my pocket the whole time. Gloria pulled the document I'd signed 3 years back and read it to me slowly, one clause at a time, the way Neil used to read me contracts at the kitchen table. Mrs. Calloway, she said, and she tapped the page. This is a management power of attorney. It authorizes Terrence to operate the business. Pay vendors. Sign payroll. Handle the day-to-day. She looked up over her glasses. It does not authorize him to encumber your real property. It does not authorize him to convey title. It does not let him borrow against your home, and it absolutely does not let him sell your building. So when he forged my name on that home equity line, he didn't just commit forgery. He committed forgery because he had to, because the legal authority he actually held wasn't enough to do what he wanted. She set the page down. Mrs. Calloway, every single thing they took outside the lines of that document, which means every single thing they took is recoverable. The HELOC can be voided, your signature's a forgery, and we can prove it. The 185,000 and the 340 are breaches of fiduciary duty and plain fraud. He didn't outsmart you. He stepped off the edge of his own authority, and he's been standing on air for 3 years. I have built 2 businesses and buried 1 husband, and I am telling you that was the sweetest sentence anybody has spoken to me since Neil called me Sunday. He had been standing on air the whole time. All I had to do was let everybody look down. Step 2, you follow the money to the bottom. Dennis Boyd went back into the books, but this time not to total the theft, to map it. Where did the rivers run? Every fake vendor, every transfer plotted on a single page with dates and account numbers, the way you'd trace a leak back through a house to the one cracked pipe. I told him I don't want a number. I want a picture. Numbers make people sad. Pictures make juries sure. He understood me immediately. Quiet men who love spreadsheets always do. Step 3. You protect what's still standing before you ever swing. This is the part the impatient ones skip, and it's the part that wins. Before I challenged a single thing, Gloria and I sat down, and we shored up the things they hadn't gotten to yet. I made a new will clean current, witness naming Jordan and Maya, and leaving a coward exactly what a coward earns. We documented my competence in writing dated and notarized because some quiet part of me already suspected the shape of what they'd try next. You build the wall before the storm. You don't wait until the wind is already in the house. There was one thing I kept to myself, even from Gloria. The Jefferson Building, the $1 million building the one Garrett Pope wanted, the one they'd forged my hand to sell, I had handled that in my own way on the grieving widow's afternoon. I told you I'd come back to the week we buried Neil 11 years before any of this ever started. I wasn't ready to play that card. A card you show too early is just a piece of paper. A card you hold is a loaded gun on the table that only you know is loaded. So I let them keep believing that building was theirs to sell. I let Pope keep believing it too. I'll only say this for now. Every few weeks that sale would inch forward, and then it would stall, and nobody on their side could understand why. I understood why. I understood why perfectly, and I said not one word. Step 4. You gather the evidence like you're going to need it, because you are. The originals, the forged HELOC, the bank disclosures, Boyd's report, the draft sale agreement with my counterfeit name on it went into a safe deposit box at a bank. None of them used under a key only I carried. Copies went to Gloria's office, logged and dated. Nothing on my phone, nothing in the house. I'd watched too many shows where the clever person keeps everything in one drawer and loses it all in one bad afternoon. I am not a clever person. I am a careful one. They are not the same thing, and the careful one wins the long game every single time. Step 5. And this was the hardest, you keep your face. 2 months. 2 months I cooked their Sunday dinners and ironed Renee's blouses and let her call me to reheat Terry's plate without a please or a thank you in it. 2 months I baked chocolate cake on Fridays and let Maya crack the eggs, and felt my heart split clean down the middle every single time, loving those babies in one half and burying their father in the other. 2 months I said yes, ma'am, and of course baby, and watched my son not meet my eyes at his own table, and I let him think it was shame. It was not shame yet. Shame was coming. I was just keeping it gift-wrapped. The only place I ever set the smile down was Walter Green's front porch. I'd drive over some evenings, and we'd sit and I'd lay out where things stood, and Walter would listen the way that man has always listened, all the way to the bottom, without reaching for the wheel. He never once told me to calm down. He never offered to fix it, never offered to swoop in, never made my war about his pride. One evening I admitted I was tired right down in my bones, and that some nights I wished a man would just come along and handle it all so I could rest. Walter poured me more coffee. He didn't say let me handle it. He said, Retta, you don't need rescuing. You've never needed rescuing a day in your life. You just need somebody to keep the coffee hot while you save your own self. I can do that. I'd be honored to do that. That's the whole job, and I'm applying for it. I looked at that gentle, stubborn old man, and for the first time in 2 months, I felt something that wasn't strategy. But that's a different part of the story, because by then Dennis Boyd had finished his picture, and when he laid it on Gloria's table and walked me through the rivers of my own stolen money, one tributary at a time, I found out the thing that hurt worse than all $725,000 put together. I found out who had drawn the map. I want to be honest with you about the lie I'd been telling myself, because everybody who's ever loved a child who turned out wrong has told themselves some version of it. The lie was it's her. It's that woman. It's Renee with her burgundy nails and her measuring tape and her mother's foreclosure she carries around like a permit to take. She got her hooks in my soft, easy boy, and she poisoned him drop by drop until he stopped being mine. My son didn't do this to me. My son had this done through him. He was weak, and weakness is a sorrow, but weakness is not the same as wickedness. I could forgive weak. I had been planning somewhere underneath the strategy to forgive weak. Dennis Boyd took that lie out of my hands as gently as a man taking a hot pan off a stove before it burns you. I traced the timeline back as far as the records go, he said, because in my experience the dates tell you who started it. The money's one thing, but money has a first move. Somebody always picks up the phone first. He turned the page around so I could read it right side up. He'd built it as a calendar. And there, 14 months before Renee ever opened the account, I'll tell you about in a minute, 14 months before a single dollar moved was the first email. From Terry to Garrett Pope Development. My son reaching out unprompted, asking a developer what a building like the one on Jefferson Street might be worth if the family were ever in a position to sell. If the family were ever in a position to sell, he wrote that. Not her, him. 8 months before that, he'd already pulled the paperwork on what it takes to place a parent in assisted living against their wishes. Boyd found the search history, the saved articles, the appointment with an elder placement consultant. Terry took on his lunch hour while I was home making his children sweet potato pie. The nursing home wasn't Renee's idea that he went along with. The nursing home was the plan, and my son was its architect. And Renee came in later once the machine was already built and did what a frightened woman does around a running machine. She climbed on. I sat very still in that office. Gloria put her hand over mine and didn't say anything, which is the truest kindness one woman can do another. You spend 40 years deciding what kind of man you raised. You hang the whole meaning of your life on it. And in one quiet morning with a forensic accountant's calendar in front of you, you find out the truth was the opposite of the comfort. He wasn't led. He led. The woman I'd been blaming, so I wouldn't have to blame him, she was guilty of plenty, but she wasn't the one who picked up the phone first. My boy picked up the phone first. My boy drew the map, and then he handed me a dish towel and called me Mama for 3 more years. That was the moment I stopped grieving a son who'd been stolen from me and started dealing with a man who had robbed me. They are not the same person. The first one I would have died for. The second one was going to learn what his grandfather meant about dirt. Now, Renee, let me give her share no more and no less, because I have made a point in my life of being exactly fair, even to people who were not fair to me. Boyd found a second account. Opened 2 years ago in her name, only no Terry on it anywhere. Money had been trickling into it, not the big thefts, those were Terry's lanes, but skim. A few thousand here, a reimbursement there, money peeled quietly off the top of a scheme she hadn't built but had learned to feed from. And the trickle ran of all the directions it could run toward Garrett Pope's world, a deposit here, a shared LLC filing there, the kind of thread that suggests a frightened woman was quietly building herself a door out of a house she didn't trust to stand. There was a shape to it that a coarser person would have chased all the way down and waved around for the shock of it. Was there more between Renee and that man than money? Maybe. There were a few things in Boyd's file a cruel woman could have made into a weapon and a spectacle. I left them alone. I want you to hear that because it tells you who I decided to be in all this. That was Terry's marriage to grieve, not mine to autopsy for an audience. I wasn't gathering my husband's family's secrets to humiliate anybody on a Tuesday. I was gathering proof to get my children's inheritance back. The day you can't tell the difference between justice and just hurting somebody is the day you've become the thing that hurt you. I had watched what greed turns a person into sitting right across my own dinner table. I was not about to catch it. So I took what I needed and I left what I didn't, and what I needed was this. Renee had skimmed knowingly from money she knew was stolen into an account she hid from her own husband alongside the very man waiting to buy my building. That's not infidelity. I didn't need it to be infidelity. That's fraud, and fraud was the only thing I'd be putting in front of a judge. I drove to Walter's that night and I didn't talk strategy. I just sat on his porch and let an old friend watch me be a mother whose son turned out to be a thief, which is its own kind of widowhood, and worse because at least Neil didn't choose to leave me. After a while, Walter said, "What do you want to do, Retta? You've got enough now to bury all 3 of them. Send the woman to prison, take the children, bankrupt the boy. You could end every one of them by Friday." "I know," I said, and I did know. That was exactly the trouble. I had the gun loaded and the targets lined up, and I sat there in the dark realizing the most dangerous moment in any war is the one where you finally can do anything and have to decide what kind of woman you'll be when the deciding is all yours. I told Walter I needed a few days to know my own heart. I didn't get a few days, because somewhere across town in a house that was legally mine, my son had finally started to feel the floor tilt under his feet. He didn't know what I had, but he knew his mother had stopped looking at the ground when she said, "Yes, baby." He knew a sharp-suited woman had once stood on the front steps and called herself my attorney. And a guilty man who senses the walls moving does not wait to find out which way. He moves first. And the move he chose was the cruelest thing anybody has ever tried to do to me in 64 years of living. It came in a manila envelope hand-delivered to me on the front porch of my own house by a process server who looked like he wished he were anywhere else. I signed for it standing in the doorway where Otis Calloway's name is still on the deed, and I opened it right there because I have never in my life put off bad news to make it feel better. Bad news rots. You read it fresh. Petition for appointment of conservator of the person and estate of Loretta May Calloway. Petitioner Terrence O. Calloway. I read it twice on the porch and a third time at the kitchen table, and I'm going to tell you the truth, even though it does not flatter me that one almost took me down. The money I could fight, the forgery I could fight. Those were attacks on what I had. This was an attack on what I was. My son had gone into a court of law and sworn in writing under his own name that his mother's mind was going, that I was confused, forgetful, no longer competent to manage my own affairs, and this is the phrase that I read maybe 10 times, the phrase that turns your blood to creek water at risk to her own welfare. He was asking a judge to declare me an incompetent, to take my signature away from me by law, to make every single thing I'd built with Gloria the new will, the recovery, all of it, the harmless scribbling of a woman the state had decided couldn't be trusted with her own name. Do you understand what that meant? If he won, he would control my money, my house, my medical care, my whole self. Every move I'd made to get my children's inheritance back would dissolve because incompetent people can't hire lawyers and can't make wills and can't fight back. He wouldn't have to steal the rest anymore. A judge would simply hand it to him with the law's blessing and call it mercy. And the file was thick. That's what frightened me most sitting alone in that kitchen. They had been building this as long as I'd been building mine. There were dates. An afternoon I'd left a burner on, except I knew for a fact Renee had turned that burner on after I left the kitchen, because I do not leave burners on. I have run a commercial kitchen for 30 years, and I would sooner forget my own name. A day I'd gotten lost driving the children home, except I'd taken the long way on purpose to show Jordan the house his great-grandfather built. and Renee had reported it as me wandering. A morning my keys went missing, and I couldn't find them for an hour. Keys Renee had moved, then found, then wrote down. Little true-sounding lies, each one a real moment bent just far enough to look like a symptom. They'd been collecting my life and filing the edges off it to make a knife. That is the cruelty I want you to sit with. It is one thing for your child to steal from you. It is another thing entirely for your child to take the ordinary moments of your love a long way home to show a boy his heritage, a Friday in a flour-dusted kitchen, and submit them to a judge as evidence that you have lost your mind. I will admit it. That night I doubted myself. Just for an hour in the dark, the way they wanted me to. I lay in the pantry room and I thought, am I slipping? Would I even know, is that what this is? That's the poison in a thing like a conservatorship. It doesn't just attack you, it makes you attack yourself. It hands you the magnifying glass and invites you to go looking for the cracks. And a frightened mind can always find a crack if it's hunting one at 3 in the morning. And then I sat up in that little bed and I said out loud to the dark in my mother's voice, "Land remembers who bled for it." I remembered every brick. I remembered the day we bought the Jefferson building and the exact figure on the loan and the name of the banker who almost wouldn't give it to us. I remembered Otis in the yard. I remembered the first $31 flat on the table. A woman who is losing her mind does not carry 70 years of a family's arithmetic in her chest like a hymn she could sing in her sleep. I was not slipping. I was being robbed, and now they were trying to rob me of the only thing I had left to fight with my own credibility. So I got up in the morning and I made the grits, and I called Gloria before I called anyone, and I said 3 words. I'm ready now. She'd been ready longer than I had, bless her. Mrs. Calloway, she said, do you remember 2 months ago when I asked you to do something that probably felt like an insult and you did it without complaint? I did. 8 weeks back, when we were shoring up what was still standing, Gloria had me sit for a full day of testing with a geriatric specialist, a Dr. Patricia Lowe, a complete neuropsychological evaluation, memory, reasoning, judgment, the whole battery. At the time, I'd thought she was just being thorough. I'd half resented it. I suspected they might come at your capacity, Gloria said now, and I could hear the grim little smile in her voice. Wealthy families do it all the time when the elder won't go quietly. So I wanted a baseline, a real one by a real specialist, dated and signed before they ever filed. They've got a stack of staged kitchen incidents written down by the very people stealing from you. We've got a board-certified physician who put you through 9 hours of testing and will swear under oath that your mind is sharper than her residence. A pause. Mrs. Calloway, they built a case out of moved car keys. We built one out of medicine. Let's go to court. The hearing was on a Thursday in a small courtroom on the 4th floor of the old county building, the kind of room that smells like radiator heat and other people's worst days. Walter drove me. He sat in the 2nd row in his good gray suit, and he did not once try to hold my hand where the room could see, because he knew I needed to walk in there looking like a woman who needed nobody's hand. He just caught my eye as I passed and gave me the smallest nod. Coffee's hot. Go save yourself. Terry and Renee sat at the petitioner's table. He was thin, gray, unshaven, a man who'd lost 20 pounds carrying a secret. He would not look at me. Renee looked at me with a face arranged into perfect daughterly concern, and I thought that woman should have gone on the stage. She's wasting all that talent on me. Their lawyer stood up and painted his picture. He was good. I'll give him that. He stood there in his rumpled suit, and he made me into the saddest thing in the world, a beloved mother, a pillar of her community declining now God's hard arithmetic on all of us, and her loving son forced into the painful, selfless duty of protecting her from herself. He read the burner. He read the keys. He read the day I wandered. He read Maya's name. The grandchildren have witnessed episodes of confusion, and used my own grandbaby as a brick in the wall, and that I won't lie that landed somewhere deep and ugly. The judge, Judge Harmon, a woman about my age with reading glasses on a chain and a face that had heard every lie a family can tell, listened to all of it without moving. Then she looked over the top of those glasses at me, and for one long second, I felt the floor of my whole life tilt toward the dark. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "do you understand why you're here today?" The room waited for the confused old woman to fumble it. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," I said. "My son has asked you to declare that I've lost my mind because it's the only way left for him to keep the $725,000 he's already taken, and to sell the building he's already forged my name to sell. Declaring me incompetent isn't about my welfare. It's the last lock on the door, and he needs you to turn the key because he's run out of keys of his own." You could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Then Gloria stood up and she went to work, and it was a beautiful thing to watch a careful woman win. She put Dr. Patricia Lowe on first. 9 hours of testing, every cognitive domain. The doctor walked the court through it in plain language that I scored in the superior range for my age, that my memory and reasoning were not merely intact, but exceptional, that she would stake her license on my full competence to manage my affairs. Gloria handed up the report dated 8 weeks before the petition was even filed. "Your Honor," she said, "the petitioners spent a year collecting moved car keys. We spent 1 day collecting medicine. I'd ask the court which it finds more persuasive." Then she dismantled the incidents one by one, the burner, the keys, the drive, and showed for each one that the only witnesses were the 2 people at that table with 725,000 reasons to lie. And then Gloria did the thing I'll love her for till I die. She didn't keep me safe behind her. She turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the simplest evidence of my client's mind is my client. May she speak for herself." And Judge Harmon, who I do believe had already made up her mind, leaned back and said, "I'd like that very much." So I spoke. I told that judge what it cost to buy a lot in 1948. I told her the exact balance on a loan we took out in 1999 and the date we paid it off. I recited 3 years of a catering company's vendors from memory and named which ones were real and which ones were ghosts my son invented with the dollar amounts to the 100. I did not raise my voice. I did the thing I have done my whole life. I counted out loud in front of everybody until there was not one soul in that room who could pretend the woman talking had lost her mind. When I finished, the courtroom was very quiet, and my son was crying into his hands, and I felt nothing about it at all, which frightened me a little, but only a little. Judge Harmon took off her reading glasses. "I've sat on this bench for 19 years, she said, "and I have rarely seen a petition this far beneath the dignity of the people who filed it." She looked at Terry and then at Renee, and she let the silence do some work. "The petition for conservatorship is denied, with prejudice." And then more quietly to me, "Mrs. Calloway, I'm sorry, go home." Home. As if I had one. But I understood what she meant, and I thanked her, and I stood up on my own 2 feet, and I walked out of that courtroom past my son without looking down. Walter was waiting in the hall. He didn't say congratulations. He knew better. You don't congratulate a woman for surviving her own child. He just said coffee. "In a minute," I said. I stood there at the top of those old marble stairs, and I let myself feel it, all of it, the fear and the fury and the terrible clean relief. And then I folded it up and put it away the way I fold everything slow and neat. Because the defense was done now. They'd thrown their cruelest punch and it had landed in the dirt. For 2 months, I had only been protecting what was still standing, keeping my face, building my wall. The waiting was over. It was my turn to move. And I knew exactly which card I'd been holding all this time, loaded and quiet on the table, waiting for the moment I'd finally pick it up. I didn't drag them back to court. I had Gloria call one meeting in her own conference room, the kind the law calls a settlement conference, and a grandmother calls a reckoning. Terry came. Renee came in a red dress that was trying very hard to look like confidence. Their lawyer came. On my side, Gloria Dennis Boyd with his laptop and 2 witnesses to sign whatever needed signing. Boyd went first, and he was merciless the way only quiet gentlemen can be. He put the picture on the wall 1 slide at a time, no drama in his voice at all, which made it worse. The $200,000 loan against the house with my forged signature blown up large enough for everyone to study the loops I never make. The $185,000 my mother's whole life vanished into a restaurant that never existed. The $340,000 bled out through ghost vendors, every fake one named aloud. And then the timeline Terry's first email to Garrett Pope 14 months before Renee moved a dime, in my son's own words, if the family were ever in a position to sell. Renee's head turned toward her husband, then slow, and I watched her understand for the first time that the man beside her had started this without her. And a slide later, I watched Terry understand that I knew about her secret account too, the one with his name nowhere on it. 2 thieves discovering in the same 5 minutes that neither had ever fully trusted the other. I did not enjoy it the way I thought I might. It just looked like what it was. Cold. Small. Then their lawyer cleared his throat and tried the only card he thought we both still held. Mrs. Calloway, whatever the past the Jefferson Street property, remains a significant asset, and any global resolution will have to account for its sale too. There isn't going to be a sale, I said. With respect, the building is the building, I said, hasn't been mine to sell in 11 years, and it has never once been my son's. That's when Gloria slid the folder across the table. Blue like the one that started all of this, except this one had my husband's name and my grandchildren's names inside it instead of a forgery. 11 years ago, Gloria said, the week after she buried her husband, Mrs. Calloway placed the Jefferson Street building into an irrevocable trust. She is the trustee. The sole beneficiaries are Jordan and Maya Calloway. It cannot be sold by her, by you, or by anyone, and it passes to those children regardless of what happens to anyone in this room. She let that sit. Your client forged Mrs. Calloway's signature to sell a building that was already locked away for her own grandchildren. He spent a year wondering why the deal kept stalling. This is why. The title was never going anywhere. The room went so quiet I could hear the building's old radiator tick. That was the card. That was the quiet errand on a grieving widow's afternoon, the loaded gun on the table that only I knew was loaded. While they spent 3 years scheming over a building I had already on the worst week of my life, made sure it could only ever belong to 2 children who crack eggs into a bowl on Friday afternoons. I didn't outfight my son. I outloved him 11 years before he ever lifted a hand against me. That's the whole secret. Love that thinks ahead beats greed every time, because greed is always in a hurry and love can wait. Terry put his face in his hands. Renee stood up, sat down, stood up again with nowhere to go. Then I told them my terms, and I want you to notice they were not the terms of a cruel woman. A cruel woman had every door open to her that morning. I could have sent the forgery to the district attorney and watched my son taken out in handcuffs. I had the proof. Instead, I slid 1 page across the table to Terry, and I made him read it out loud because some things a man has to hear in his own voice. He would sign a full admission and restore every recoverable dollar on a schedule for as long as it took. He would go to therapy, real therapy, a year of it with a counselor of my choosing, not because I wanted his soul fixed for my sake, but because those 2 children deserved a father who knew why he'd done it. And he would tell the whole truth about every account, including hers, so that the law could fall where it honestly fell, because I was not going to bury Renee's separate frauds to protect my son, and I was not going to weaponize her secrets to destroy her either. I was going to do the one clean thing, hand the truth to the people whose job it is to weigh it and let it weigh. In exchange, I would not file the forgery complaint against my son. And if I don't sign, Terry whispered. Then you read about yourself in the paper, I said. And your children read about you in school." Renee shrieked that he shouldn't sign that I was bluffing, that I'd never send my own boy to jail. And Gloria quietly laid the already prepared criminal complaint on the table, my name on the affidavit dated that morning, real as a tombstone. The shrieking stopped. Terry picked up the pen. His hand shook the way it must have shaken the day he first forged mine. He signed his real name this time. And when it was done, he looked up at me, ruined 41 years old, and said the only true thing he'd said in 3 years. "Mama, I'm sorry." I stood and I gathered my purse and I gave my son the last thing I had to give him, which was the truth. Plainly, the way my mother gave it to me in a garden a lifetime ago. "I believe you," I said. "And I can forgive you, Terrence. I'm your mother. I'll be forgiving you in my grave. But forgiveness isn't a set of keys. You don't get the house back because I forgave you. You don't get my name back in your hand. You showed me exactly what you do with what you're trusted with." I picked up my husband's blue folder, the one with my grandbaby's names in it. "So I forgive you free and clear, and I'm keeping the keys." I walked out. Behind me, I could hear my son weeping, and for the first time underneath everything I heard something in it that wasn't fear of getting caught. I heard shame. Finally, the kind you can build a new man on. I let the door close and I went to find Walter because the coffee was hot and I had earned it. 6 months is no time at all, and it's a whole lifetime depending on which way you're walking. I'm walking forward now, so it's been a lifetime. The forged loan was voided. A signature you never made can't bind you. It turns out no matter how good the forger got at your loops. My mother's $185,000 and the company's $340 are coming back to me. The slow way a payment at a time for as long as it takes my son to earn them honest. I don't need the money anymore, but he needs to pay it. There's a difference, and we both know it. Renee answered for what Renee did. Her own account. Her own choices weighed by people whose job it is to weigh such things, not by me, and not for a show. Garrett Pope's interest in this family evaporated the very hour the building did, which told me everything I'd politely declined to chase. Men like that are only ever in love with the deed. When the deed walks away, so do they. She's gone from the house now. The children see her sometimes. It's hard and it should be, and time will do what time does. The house on the 1948 dirt is mine free and clear, Otis Calloway's name still on the deed beside Cornelius's beside mine. I moved back into the big bedroom. The pantry room is a pantry again. And the Jefferson Street building, the $1 million building they forged my hand to steal, I opened its doors back up. Not for catering this time. I turned the ground floor into a community kitchen, free Sunday suppers for anybody in the neighborhood who's hungry, and a program upstairs that teaches teenagers the trade knife skills and sheet pans and how to flatten your first dollar on a table and feel like you robbed a bank. There's a scholarship attached to it now. It's called the Cornelius Calloway Fund, after the man who taught me I was never selling pie. The trust holds it all for Jordan and Maya, the way it always quietly did. Terry works for a freight company across town. He's not a boss anymore. He's a man with a punch card and a small apartment and a counselor he sees on Wednesdays. Last month he told me, "Mama, I sleep through the night now. No debts, no lies. Nobody's voice in my ear telling me what I'm owed." He has the children Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on Saturdays, all 3 of them come to me. This past Saturday, Maya, 7 now, the front teeth finally grown back in, stood on her stool and cracked the eggs mostly into the bowl. Jordan measured the flower-level cup scientist's frown. Terry stood beside me at the counter and whisked quiet, and after a while he said low, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I put my hand over his. "I can step back from you, son," I told him. "I'll never turn away from you. Those aren't the same thing." He wiped his face on his sleeve and went back to whisking. Maya announced to the whole kitchen that it was Grandma's magic hour. And she's right. It always was. That evening, Walter and I sat on the porch of the new kitchen, watching the neighborhood kids spill out onto Jefferson Street And I told him the thing my mother told me in the garden, the thing I'd been carrying my whole life without fully hearing. Land remembers who bled for it. I bled for this, every brick of it, and it remembered me. They thought I was an old woman to push out a door. Turns out I was the one holding the keys the whole time, and I never not for one single day let go. I've told you all of this, not to make a villain of my son. God knows I'd take him back into my arms tonight. But because somebody listening is sitting at a table right now, where they're being made small, and they've started to believe they deserve it. So let me leave you what this cost me to learn. Self-respect is not for sale, and it is not for trade. Not for a roof, not for a seat at the table, not even for the love of your own child. The day you start paying for your place in pieces of yourself, you will always be asked for more. And here is the part nobody tells the gentle ones love is not the same as surrender. You can forgive a person completely and still never hand them back the keys. Forgiveness is something you do for your own heart so it doesn't curdle. Trust is something a person earns with their hands. Don't ever let anyone tell you that withholding the second means you failed at the first. The strongest thing I ever did wasn't the lawsuit or the courtroom or the card I'd held all those years. It was the quiet morning in the worst week of my life when I chose to think ahead for the people I loved, because love that plans is the only thing greed can't outrun. Greed is always in a hurry. Love can wait. If you're being pushed toward a door tonight, hear me. Pack your bag if you have to. Walk out with your head up. But child, keep your keys. I did. And that has made all the difference.